welcome to the another video on Pachehra Talks. My name is Arun, Solutions Architect, MCT, and currently working with Novintech, which is one of the best organization to work with. And today we are going to explore the other features of Azure Firewall Premium, DNS Proxy, and Custom DNS. Both of these features are really important to understand. It seems like they're overlapping and it seems like they're a bit confusing and complicated. That's the reason we prepare this diagram so that we can understand the need of both the features, when to use both, are they complementary to each other, or it's mandatory to use both together. So we are going to understand all these things, and then again the few basic stuff like how it works, what are the benefits, and the best practices. So let's get started, starting with DNS proxy first, and then we'll get the custom DNS in between as well, or maybe we can talk about both together. So basically, when we use Azure Firewall, we have these two features on the same pane. When you go to the Azure Firewall, I'll show you in documentation. Under DNS settings of firewall, we have an option to enable custom DNS. And then below that, we have an option to enable custom or enable DNS proxy. Okay, now let's try to understand what are these. So let's start with the DNS proxy first. So DNS proxy is a feature of Azure Firewall which act as an intermediary for DNS queries. As the name says, of course, they are going to do something with the DNS. So it will act as an intermediary for DNS query, which means all the DNS query will come to the Azure Firewall. Let me show you. Let's suppose this is a Spock. It does some xyz.com. If there is DNS proxy, DNS proxy enabled, in that case, what happens? The query will go to the Azure Firewall always for the DNS. For the DNS queries, it does xyz.com, it will go here. Now, this proxy has the information to retrieve the information from the custom DNS or whatever DNS configured for the firewall. Now, what happens if it's not DNS proxy, but we have custom DNS for the firewall? In that situation, the query from the VM for the DNS will not go to the firewall directly. It can get the information from the custom DNS that is configured for the VM. For example, in this hub and spoke, these two are on Azure, let's say these, and we have on-prem right here. So this is the DNS server, custom DNS server configured on the virtual network. So this VM will go to the custom DNS server. Okay. And what is the mean of this custom DNS server? This is for the use of firewall only. Whenever firewall needs to resolve the DNS query, it will send to this custom DNS. Okay. So what is the basic difference? If it is proxy enabled, or let's say without proxy, then the custom DNS is only for the firewall whenever firewall needs to resolve the DNS queries. And in that situation, VMs or any Azure resource would have its own custom DNS if you're using custom DNS, or it will go to the Azure by default. But if you're using DNS proxy, then you need to update the virtual network where you have updated the custom domain as the IP address of uh, Azure Firewall, if that is your answer. Yes. Okay. That is the reason all the DNS query will go to the firewall only, and it will act as an intermediary for the DNS queries. I hope it is clear a little bit. We'll keep on going and start understanding it further deeper, and it will start make sense. Okay. So for now, we understood DNS, custom DNS, and DNS proxy. When DNS proxy is not enabled on the custom DNS, and when DNS proxy enabled, how this resource flow changes, and how this firewall, when firewall uses the DNS queries. Okay. Now, so what does this mean? It means this DNS proxy works perfectly awesome or useful when combined with the custom DNS capabilities, right? Because if firewall is already enabled for the custom DNS, which means all the request which comes here for DNS proxy enabled, it would have the information of custom DNS. For example, this is the custom DNS and it will get the information back, do the filtering and send it back. Okay. All right. So custom DNS in Azure Firewall enables the specification of one or more DNS servers that the firewall uses. That's the key. That's the key. Do not get lost. Firewall uses. Okay. That's the key. Firewall uses for what? Firewall uses for resolving DNS queries instead of using the default DNS settings. So this feature is particularly useful for integrating with on-prem DNS or third-party DNS services, or you have custom DNS on your Azure environment. So let's try to understand the concept of DNS proxy first. I hope it is clear now. We are just trying to put everything in words, what we have learned through this diagram. So DNS proxy in Azure Firewall serves as a intermediary DNS queries, or you can also say DNS forwarder. Okay, why? Because it is intercepting all the DNS queries and then forwarding it to the custom DNS and getting the response back. So Azure resource or VM doesn't know. They think this is the DNS only. This is where we have to go for the DNS queries. So this setup is particularly beneficial when using custom DNS settings in Azure Firewall, as it ensures all DNS requests adhere to the organization specified DNS resolution policies. All right. So how exactly it works? I hope this is clear as of now. So if not, just stay with me. Everything will fall in place because we're going to use lots of examples. This is very high level. We'll go a little deep with some examples to make sense out of everything. So before we go into this, let's try to understand what all we can configure, how, and get the importance of it. And then we'll go through this diagram again, and also go through the documentation. So DNS query feature is activated on the Azure Firewall settings, where administrators also specify the custom DNS servers to be used for name resolution. So how it works? First of all, we need to do the activation and configuration. If I could show you, this is not it, DNS settings. What is there? Yes. So firewall, DNS, enabled, custom, right here. Here we have DNS proxy disabled and enabled. So this is what I'm talking about. DNS proxy feature is activated in Azure Firewall settings, under settings DNS. All right. Now, once this is configured, what would happen? The interception of DNS queries will happen. How? Because DNS queries from clients are directed to Azure Firewall, which act as a DNS server from the perspective of the client. Okay. In that situation, if proxy is enabled, okay, we're talking about DNS proxy here. With DNS proxy, let's say custom DS plus proxy. That's what we are talking. So all the queries from clients are directed to the Azure Firewall, which act as a DNS server because we update virtual network DNS as a custom DNS as the IP address of the Azure Firewall. So Azure Firewall forwards these queries to the configured DNS server. Your Azure VM, this doesn't know where it is forwarding. It will only forward it to here because custom DNS is the IP address of the firewall. Then it's the duty of the firewall, responsibility of firewall to go to the DNS server, get the response, cache it, and send it back. Why cache it? To improve the resolution times for future queries to the same domains, and also utilize those results of DNS and IPs for the filtering. So query forwarding and caching. Caching is something very important. Now, the DNS response is relayed back to the querying client, completing the resolution process. So everything is going through the firewall in case of DNS query enabled along with the custom DNS. If custom DNS not there, even though everything will resolve from the firewall through DNS proxy. So these are what? These are complementary. This is complementary, not mandatory, but it is always prudent to use both together. So why should we use it? There must be some kind of benefits. Let's go through these. The very first is the centralized DNS management, because there is one piece where everything is coming. Otherwise, this was going here, this was going to this DNS server, and firewall is going to his own DNS server. Okay. The point is centralized DNS management simplifies uh, like simplifies DNS query handling and caching within Azure Firewall, making it easier to enforce consistent DNS policies across the network. That's what the centralized does in any aspect. But here it is DNS management. So, with regards to the consistent DNS policies across the network. And of course, this is the security specialist series that we're talking about. So it's gonna improve the security. The question is how? By ensuring that all DNS traffic is inspected. All DNS traffic is inspected and filtered according to the rules configured in Azure Firewall, including the application of threat intelligence and filtering capabilities. And finally, because we talked about caching right here, it will increase the resolution time, reduce the resolution time for subsequent queries to the same domains, improving overall network performance. So reducing resolution time and improving performance. And finally, compliance always comes whenever we talk about security. So it offers better compliance with organizational policies and regulatory requirements by controlling DNS traffic flow and providing visibility into DNS queries and response. So compliance and visibility. These are some benefits that we should get when we are going to utilize DNS proxy. And let's see what are the best practices for this. Well, the very first is we need to configure a fallback DNS because, you know, we have to prepare for resiliency. Ensure that fallback DNS server settings are configured to maintain DNS resolution capabilities in case the primary custom DNS server become unavailable. So fallback. Or then regularly monitor the performance impact of DNS caching. DNS caching and adjust cache size and TTL setting as necessary to optimize resolution efficiency without overburdening the firewall's resources. So that's the second thing that we can think of. Then finally, if possible, configure DNS queries to be sent over secure channels, which means HTTPS to protect against eavesdropping and tampering encryption. Then, of course, analyze logs generated by DNS proxy activity to detect anomalous pattern that may indicate security threats or misconfiguration. You gotta review it, review it. Then ensure that users and network administrators are aware of the DNS proxy setup and its implications for DNS resolution and troubleshooting. So educate your users. Now we can take an example to just cover whatever we learned as of now. So let's suppose this machine right here try to access www.xyz.com. Okay, let's suppose this try to access xyz.com when DNS proxy is enabled. In that case, this is the scenario. Now, if DNS proxy is enabled, this means this is also there, IP address also there, then VM is going to send it to firewall. Okay. So what happens when a client within virtual network tries to access this xyz.com, the query is intercepted by Azure Firewall DNS proxy. Intercepted from our perspective, from VM perspective, this is the DNS server. Okay, this is what is configured. So it intercepted uh, by the Azure Firewall's DNS proxy, which forwards the query to the specified custom DNS server for firewall. Okay. Now the response is cached. So response is cached. This is very important. So response is cached by Azure Firewall, making subsequent queries to like xyz.com if someone else does, the resolution would be faster. So this setup not only improves DNS query efficiency, but also ensures that all DNS traffic complies with the organization security policies because everything is coming here. Okay. Now we need to understand custom DMS and proxy little more, little deeper, so that we all are on the same page. So how can we do that? By only understanding few examples and the need of using the particular feature. So let's talk about custom DNS first. Custom DNS allow to specify your own DNS server for domain name resolution instead of using Azure's default DNS. Okay, that's what the custom DNS means. We all understand this. But here in Azure Firewall, this is particularly useful when you want to use your corporate DNS server for name resolution, which might contain internal domain names not resolvable through public DNS servers. Okay. So and this is clear now. Without DNS proxy, this is why we use the custom DNS, right? And DNS proxy we have already talked about. So what is the key differences? Custom DNS specifies which DNS server Azure Firewall should use for domain name resolution. Azure Firewall. Okay, and DNS proxy enables Azure Firewall to act as a DNS server for your Azure resources or VMs. That is the uh, difference. So I hope it is clear. Now there is few things that we need to understand. The very first thing is what happened when we do not use DNS proxy and only use custom DNS. Now, when DNS proxy is not enabled, this is not there, then what would happen? Only custom DNS is there. Only custom DNS is there, and this is not there. Now, this VM within your Azure network resolves DNS query by contacting their configured DNS servers. For example, this is not here, so it will go to this DNS server directly and get the response. That's how it will work. Now, what would happen? There is two main issues will happen. The very first thing is there is a timing differences, which means DNS queries from your client might be resolved at different times compared to the similar queries made by the Azure Firewall for its own purpose. Because this custom domain is used by Firewall for its own purpose, it would have something else information. It might have a different information because there is a difference of time. Okay. Since DNS records can change due to DNS load balancing, TTL expiration, or other factors. So it's not like every day it's going to happen, but it will or it can. Queries made at different times might result in different IP addresses being returned to the same domain name. So this is something that could happen, and if it is a mission critical app for your organization, so it would be a disaster. Second thing, if the queries are made at roughly at the same time, clients and Azure Firewall might use different DNS server if not explicitly configured to use the same. Yes, so maybe this is a different server. This is going for this. Maybe this for this hub has another DNS server and it go to here, right? So if not explicitly configured to use the same, different DNS server might have a different records cached, leading to the discrepancy in the DNS responses. This discrepancy can affect how traffic is routed or filtered, potentially bypassing intended firewall rules or policies based on domain names. So these are the two issues that can come up if you are not using proxy and only using custom DNS. Timing difference. This is very important to understand. And then the response discrepancy. Okay. So this is what I was trying to explain. Now, if we enable the proxy, then what would happen? Things will be different. It will act as a centralized DNS resolution then all DNS query from clients are directed to Azure Firewall, which then act as the DNS server for these queries. That's what we talked about at the very beginning of this video. Now Azure Firewall forwards these queries to the designated DNS server, either Azure's default or custom, it doesn't matter. All the query will come here and this has the mechanism to resolve it. And the second thing is consistency and control. Like all these benefits we are talking about, we'll start getting if we use DNS proxy uh, with this. So we can end this video by a simple scenario. Let's imagine you have an Azure firewall rule that allow access to xyz.com. Without DNS proxy, your client might resolve xyz.com to an IP address that was recently updated. While Azure Firewall resolving the domain name later or using a different DNS server gets an outdated IP address. As a result, the client's access to xyz.com might uh, not work or might bypass the firewall rule. So with DNS proxy enabled, both the client and the firewall use the same most current IP address resolved by the firewall, ensuring the traffic flows through the firewall as intended and is subjected to the correct rules and policies. So yeah, that's all about custom DNS feature and DNS proxy. These are complementary to each other. We should use these features and it will help us during the FQDN filtering that we do on the network rules, as we showed you on the documentation right here, and it acting as an intermediary. Okay, DNS proxy. Yeah, that's all. Well, I hope it was interesting and some concept got cleared and it was informative. Well, thank you for watching and you guys have a wonderful day. Bye bye.